Hello, I'm Sean Hughescamp.
And I'm Monsignor Charles Minor. Welcome to this special edition of Real to Real. Many great things have happened to the Catholics of Delaware Valley. One such great was the canonization of St. John Newman. The Universal Church has reached to us again and called Archbishop John Foley and summoned him to Rome to become the commissioner in charge of social communications for the entire church.
Tuesday, May 8th, was a very exciting day for Archbishop John Foley. It was on that day that he was ordained an Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Church by Cardinal John Crowell, as more than 2,000 people watched in the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul. Archbishop Foley, the editor of the Catholic Standard and Times since 1970, and a church communicator known internationally for his professional and spiritual manner, received his ring and mitre in order to become the president of the Pontifical Commission for Social Communications, a high-level church position in Rome that is responsible for the Vatican's media relations around the world. The new archbishop is a native of Sharon Hill in Delaware County and was educated at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, St. Thomas University in Rome, and Columbia University in New York. He has performed many special duties for the church, including serving as press secretary for Pope John Paul II's visit to the United States, but he's best known as the editor of the Catholic Standard and Times, and to many clergy as a professor at St. Charles Seminary. He will leave for Rome at the end of May. Recently, Monsignor Minor had the opportunity to visit at length with Archbishop Foley, a conversation which we present to you now.
When speaking of opportunities the priesthood has offered me down through the years, I've always had to say, heaven owes me nothing. And that includes the areas of parish work and administration work, but especially the work of being priest promoter for the Catholic Standard and Times, and later director of the Archdiocesan Communication Center. Today I have the wonderful opportunity to share these concepts and ideas with Archbishop John Foley. Archbishop Foley, I want to say how happy I am to have this opportunity to share with you some of our reflections about the work of the Catholic Standard and Times and communication in the Archdiocese.
Thank you very much, Monsignor Minor. As I've often said to you, I wouldn't be in this situation today unless you had been in Holy Spirit Church in Sharon Hill in 1944 preaching about the Catholic Standard and Times and causing my parents to take out a subscription to that newspaper.
Would you say the circulation has gone up ever since? It's a wonderful thing, because many times we think about the role of Archdiocesan Director of the Standard and Times you have been as editor, and my own as promoter those years back. The role of the priest in these areas of communications, of print, and the various other actual secular world the priesthood gets into is something maybe confusing to many people to say it's not a priestly work or religious work.
Well, I always thought that the work of communications was a priestly work, because our Lord said, teach all nations, proclaim the gospel. And the work of the Catholic press, the work of Catholic communicators generally, is to spread the good news of the gospel, not only to make Scripture better known, but to make better known the heroic lives of individuals who attempt to live in God's love and share it with others. So I think it's an essential work of the church.
It's hard sometimes to see our vocations generalized in this area, because it seems we're confined and we're not among the people. And the sense of any priest wants to be among people, yet to be confined to an office can be a difficult situation.
Well, I think it gives you a number of different publics. First of all, as priests, our work is a work of faith. We don't know what effect our preaching is having on individuals. We don't know what effect our personal contact is having on individuals. But as a priest editor or as a priest appearing on television, you have a wider public in whom you are planting the seeds of faith, we hope of virtue, and that's working with people and among people.
Is this then how you would describe the work of the Pontifical Commission for Social Communication, which is now to be your new work?
Well, I hope so. The idea of attempting to make the good news of Christ better known on a worldwide level, because the idea of trying to help individuals to use the means of social communication, the mass media, more effectively to proclaim the gospel, helping religious institutions to have access to the mass media throughout the world, especially in areas where governments might not be particularly sympathetic to that, to encourage people to make sure that entertainment is good and decent, around the world, that it's uplifting, that it reaffirms the values that are most important for maintaining lives of virtue.
But that the Holy Father needs such a commission, say a pontifical commission, that seems to me to be rather, broad. Why would he need such a commission, do you think?
Well, of course, the Church is universal, and all of the departments of the Church serve the Holy Father in his work as supreme pastor, shepherd of the universal Church.
The word curia comes to mind, or curia, the people who really surround the Holy Father. I mean, in a very, even limited sense, even. Your role would be pretty limited to him, wouldn't it, in service to him?
No, I think it's a service to him in this case to open up the channels through which people can hear his message more clearly, cover him more effectively, because he's the top communicator in the Church. It's not the president of the Pontifical Commission. All I see as my role and the role of the Commission would be to open up the channels, clear away the barriers to more effective coverage of the Holy Father in particular and the Church in general, so that the message of the gospel may be heard more clearly, that individuals have that access to truth, and the Church has nothing to fear from truth. God is truth.
That gives the opportunity then to say something has been in the press a lot, the internationalization of the Curia. Heretofore it seems that the Curia has been confined to people around the Holy Father with the same diplomatic training, mostly of the Italian descent and culture. And now the internationalization of it brings you and people like you into the picture.
Well, the Pope is Bishop of Rome, and Rome is in Italy, so many Italians have traditionally worked in the Curia, the Church's central administration, and that's been natural. But the Church is also universal, and to reflect that universality of the Church, they now have an Irishman in charge of the mission congregation. They have an African in charge of the congregation for bishops. So they're attempting to have the entire Church represented in the universal governance of the Church. And I think that's generally a healthy move.
It's wonderful to think of the internationalization, but at the same time, what about people who were already, I won't say entrenched, but involved in these works for so many years? When they look on this with kind of a jealousy to see their sense of participation kind of not dissipated but minimized.
Well, I would hope not. Well, first of all, I never anticipated that I would be going to Rome. That came as a bolt out of the blue. That was completely unanticipated on my part. So I had no role in this, no inkling that this was coming about. So I would hope they wouldn't blame it on me because I knew nothing about it. And I've received some notes from Rome that said, in case you think this is the case, that individuals would be annoyed, don't think that's the case at all, because we're happy to have you come. And I sincerely believe that, because I had worked with the people at the Vatican Press Office before and with the people at the Pontifical Commission for Social Communications before. And my background, both in work and in education, was in journalism and communications, so that might be helpful. And I know the members of the International Press Corps, both from the television networks from around the world and the magazines and newspapers who are headquartered in Rome. So at least I have that familiarity from former work in Rome, so I don't think they would be saying, who is this stranger coming into our midst? They've been very nice.
I truly believe, too, that like our own work in the Archdiocesan office in Philadelphia, the priestly role comes forward. The notion that you are called as a priest, and therefore religiously responding to the Holy Father's request is the same as here in the Archdiocese. We talk about the ideas of the priestly role being responsive to the invitation of the bishop.
I'd like to mention one thing here. When I was sent to study philosophy and then journalism, Cardinal Kroll said, make sure you're a priest who happens to be a journalist and not a journalist who happens to say Mass.
Let's pick that up when we come back. A bishop is the bond of unity in the Church. He is that force for unifying all those varying elements which make up the Christian edifice. already ordained a priest, the one who becomes ordained a bishop then receives an effectual power to integrate so many things which he never had himself before. And that's why we speak of the fullness of the priesthood. Archbishop Foley, it's great to hear you talk about the idea of having the fullness of the priesthood, but remembering, as Cardinal Kroll said to you, remember that you must be a priest as well as an editor as well as a priest.
Yes, but he said, of course, that a priest, not a journalist who happens to be a priest, but a priest who happens to be a journalist. And in that way, the idea of preaching the good news is an essential part of the work of a priest, and certainly of a bishop, because a bishop is a successor to the apostles, and they were the ones given the commission by Christ to teach all nations.
It must be an overwhelming thought, Archbishop, to think that you are now called to be an apostle. You think of Jesus calling Matthew and James and John. Jesus, through the Holy Father, is called John Foley. That's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, and it scares me greatly.
handle
But
that?
God, I didn't sleep too well the first couple of weeks after I got the news, and I lost some weight, but that might not have been all bad news. But I think we have to have faith in God and His help. Certainly no one of us is worthy to be a priest, to be another Christ, to do the work of forgiving sins in the name of Christ, of consecrating bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ.
The beautiful aspect of vocation, I think, is to the elements which make it possible for you to respond to the vocation that God gives you. For instance, in our families, we have elements that made it possible for us to grow up. That is, the vocations there, we could respond to it. Do you think or see or recall elements which might have made you available for the vocation of priesthood, and then as priest to a vocation to bishop?
Well, I think my family life was marvelous. There was an atmosphere of faith, of prayer. I remember my parents kneeling down every night at home, and they would end their prayer with "God bless Jean, Jack, and little Jackie too, and keep them well." A beautiful little family prayer that they had, and that we still have. My father is dead now, 20 years, but I think he's still interceding for my mother and me in heaven, and will certainly is a witness to the ordination to the episcopate. The idea of vocation is certainly fostered in the home. My parents never said, "Are you interested in becoming a priest?" But there was an obvious love for the church, for the priesthood, an overwhelming love of God and a desire to do His will. And that was certainly present in my Catholic education through elementary school, high school, college. There was that preeminent desire on the part of my teachers, my associates in school, to know God's will and to do it. I remember the motto of the community that taught me and you in elementary school, and the motto of the community that taught me in high school and college was "Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam," for the greater glory of God. That will be my motto as a bishop, because that's what I think our work must be, to offer the best possible to God and in communications for the greater glory of God, to make God better known, loved, and served all over the world.
Speaking of the elements in the family which made it available to think about the priesthood, I was impressed on Holy Thursday when Bishop Schulte referred to in his homily to us priests, how there obviously is a sense of the oncoming bishopric in the diocese, that the priests themselves have a sense of bishop, a desire for the vocation of bishop among themselves. And we were very happy that you were picked from among us to be one of our apostles of the church today.
Well, thank you very much. I was very surprised that I was picked. I was stunned at that. I was very touched by the fact that the priests seemed to have reacted so well. And one of the beautiful things in my life has been teaching at St. Charles Seminary, where I've taught all of the priests who have been ordained since 1973. It's wonderful to see such generosity and such willingness to serve on the part of young men. So often youth, I think, gets a bad reputation because the ones who are publicized are often the ones who cause trouble or are rebellious. But in this case, you see individuals who want to serve God and serve others and give themselves completely, and it's been a real privilege.
Sincerely, I think the privilege is expressed too in your own spirit of evangelization. Those who responded to the philosophical training you gave them and the personal relationship of a student to priest you had in the seminary have to be aware somehow about your own spirit of evangelization, which you bring to the idea of being bishop.
Well, of course, you, as a former director of the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, know how important it is to reach out to those who might not be getting a full Catholic education, to reach out to those who are not members of the faith, to reach out to those who are alienated from the faith or inactive in its practice.
How do you see the Holy Father reaching out like this to the world? That world evangelization theme must be very difficult for him.
Well, he does reach out to the world. He is truly a universal pastor, a universal shepherd. He travels around the world. He attempts to personify the presence of Christ among the people, to lead people to a deeper love of God. And I think it's important to make people feel that they are not alone in their belief in God and in their desire to follow God's will in their lives.
The political ramifications of such an apostolate are terribly involved. Say, for instance, the El Salvador situation. The Holy Father was through South America and Central America, and that constant evangelization and that political, upheaval and turmoil must be awfully difficult. What about your own expressions of that?
Well, regarding the Holy Father's presence in these areas, not only has he preached Jesus Christ, but he has reminded individuals of their dignity and their destiny as children of God, of their individual preciousness, if you'll excuse that expression, in the sight of God, that each individual is a precious individual, a unique person created by God and called by God to eternal glory. And if individuals have that sense of their dignity, they're certainly going to wish to participate in their government and determining their destiny. And the Holy Father awakens that sense of personal dignity in those to whom he preaches. Now, I was in El Salvador myself as a member of the official delegation appointed by President Reagan to observe the elections in El Salvador. And there are certainly problems in El Salvador, inequities, economic inequities, all of that. But in the elections, I saw individuals in a free, fair election really eager to participate in the selection of their government and to realize their dignity as human beings in participating in their own destiny.
And I'm eager to talk about that once more when we return. You had mentioned preciousness of people, which I think is a very important element in which to view the Holy Father's concern for the people around the world. Your own aspect of the El Salvadorans when you were there, how did you get to go to the El Salvador thing in the first place, Archbishop?
I got a call from the State Department, and an individual said, I have the honor to inform you that President Reagan has named you a member of the official observer delegation to observe the elections in El Salvador. And I said, you must be kidding, because I figured, how would the president ever get my name?
This has been your response on a couple of occasions.
Regarding being named a bishop, because that was a week later.
Yes.
And I said, you mean you have some good news and some bad news? The good news is that you have a presidential appointment. The bad news is that you're going to El Salvador in the middle of a civil war. He didn't think any of those things were particularly funny, but the idea was that they wanted individuals to go there, to travel around the country, to speak to the people, and I speak a little Spanish, to see if they really thought that the elections were honest. We went into the polling places, we spoke to the election officials, we observed how the process was going on, and I think it was a very, very fair, open process. And
Is
it was
that kind
marvelous.
of a visit advantageous to our national government or not?
Well, I went down there expecting that there might be some resentment on the part of the people. On the contrary, they were delighted to see people from the United States, and they were delighted to show that they were having a truly democratic election. So any misgivings I might have had in going down, both regarding personal safety and regarding the reception we would receive from the people, were dispelled. We were safe, although we were guarded. But the reception of the people was so friendly and open and obviously proud in the freedom of the electoral process that I was moved by their dedication and desire for democracy.
As those people were aware of our national concern for them, I, for one, have always been aware of our state concern, of your participation, say, the State Ethics Board or as Ethics Commission in Pennsylvania. Have you found any response on that anywhere along the line?
Well, 5 years ago, I was appointed to be a member of the State Ethics Commission. I was appointed by former Governor Schaap with the concurrence of Governor Thornburg to that commission. And the idea was to foster integrity in public life. I teach ethics, or I taught ethics in the seminary, and it was viewed that I would be a worthwhile member of that particular commission. And it has been a very interesting experience. And I think it's important that the church not be involved in politics, but that the church be involved, as the Holy Father is, in articulating the dignity of the individual and in attempting to encourage institutions which will foster the dignity of the individual. And then, of course, another aspect is to foster integrity and virtue. And membership in the Ethics Commission really was an attempt to foster integrity and virtue in government, confidence by people in the government that they select.
I'm glad you touched on that subject of the Holy Father in politics, because I, for one, always felt he got a very bad press, and his very careful delineation of what priest's role and religious role is in politics. And the Holy Father's movements around the world certainly have given you an opportunity several times with him to see him in operation. What's your reaction to his operation around the world and traveling like that?
That he is not involved in partisan politics in any way with any particular party. His idea, as we've already said, is the notion of certainly the supremacy of God, the fact that God must be recognized by individuals and by governments as a reality in life. And second, the inviolable dignity of the individual as a child of God. And those two principles have been preeminent in whatever Pope John Paul II has done. And that's not a political act, that's a very human act. And I think for individuals to be reminded of the priority of God in their lives and of their own personal dignity is a very important thing for them.
Christian communications has a broad breadth to it, and one which I think may confine you to a great deal. Do you think it's going to keep you confined to, say, an office in Rome, or you yourself have the opportunity to go abroad with the Holy Father?
I don't know. That will be up to him and up to my superiors in Rome, because even though I'm an archbishop, some archbishops are more equal than others. So I have bosses in the Vatican, in the Holy See, and they'll determine what my work will be. I'm going over to Rome, as I've gone to every assignment, I guess, with an act of faith that I'll be told what to do, and God will point the way for the work that I will be expected to do on behalf of the church, on behalf of
we speak
our Lord.
Of the third world, of the opportunities and problems. Also, say the problems in Poland today. You've been to Poland with the Holy Father.
Yes, several
times.
times.
In Ireland, you've been to Ireland with the Holy Father. Do you see the Holy Father as all just problem-bound?
No, I see him as a peacemaker. Certainly the problems are there. The Holy Father isn't problem-bound. The Holy Father is part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that's a wonderful thing, to be a representative of a church which is part of the solution to the world's problems. In this country, I know I've been pleased on a number of occasions to have been invited to give the prayer for democracy at Independence Hall on the 4th of July. It's been a great personal thrill for me. And it's been a wonderful thing to be a citizen of the United States and to pledge allegiance to one nation under God. And I would hope that through the work of communications in the church, we can have not only in the United States one nation under God, but we can have throughout the world one world at peace under God.
Archbishop Foley, I said earlier that heaven owes me nothing in becoming a priest. And one of the privileges I treasure very much is not only a personal friendship and acquaintance with you, but I know I speak for all of us priests and people of the Archdiocese and Delaware Valley to wish you very, very well and ask you to keep us in your prayers. We know that the Holy Father will be safe. He will speak the truth as long as you are around.
Well,
so speak well for him, will you?
Thank you very much. And I wrote once that I've never had an unhappy day as a priest, and you have contributed to that happiness greatly by your example, by your work, and now I ask you to support me by your prayers.
You have it all. Thank you all. I'm sure I pledge your support and prayerful good wishes to Archbishop Foley, as to all the bishops and priests of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and all Delaware Valley. They especially would ask you, with Archbishop Foley, for your prayers that priests in the world may come, and they may always speak it for the Holy Father, the apostles, and all the bishops and friends throughout the country. God bless you, and thank you for joining us in this conversation. In the last few years, Sean and I have had a wonderful opportunity to work nearby Archbishop Foley, and we were able then to see his great professionalism and be enjoying his wonderful warmth and goodness. And so how nice it is to see him again.
And it's nice to be able to have the opportunity to congratulate him and to offer him our prayerful good wishes on his new assignment in Rome. Next week, we'll see how a local parish helps city people. We'll have part 2 of our Cloistered Nun series. Mike Gallagher takes a look at the movie Swing Shift. The Troubadour of the King returns. And we'll meet some high-stepping senior citizens. Thanks for being with us. We hope you enjoyed tonight's show.
Good night, and God bless you.
Good night.